There we go. Good afternoon. I now call this meeting to order. This meeting of the Community Affairs and Planning Committee is being held in hybrid meeting format with virtual and in-person participation by members of the public, staff, and council. This meeting is also being live streamed and may be viewed online at ajax.ca/live. A friendly reminder to all participants to please use their microphone at all times for the benefit of those participating in council chambers and joining remotely. To those making submissions as part of a public meeting, please ensure you sign in using the sheet available at the accessibility podium to preserve rights available. We would like to begin this meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we are gathered is situated within the traditional treaty territories of the Mississaugas, but more specifically, the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nations, signatories of the Gunshot Treaties of 1788 and the Williamson Treaties of 1923. This land is and will continue to be home to Indigenous peoples. Let us acknowledge the mistakes and traumas of the past through authenticity and support truth and reconciliation. Let us engage and celebrate Indigenous communities by being leaders of action in acknowledging the United Nations Declaration of Rights and Indigenous Peoples and Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendation towards truth and reconciliation. Let us keep these principles close as we continue towards truth and reconciliation as we move forward with kindness and respect as a community. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, moving into adoption of the minutes. That the minutes of the Committee of Community Affairs and Planning Committee meeting be held on October 2nd, 2020 be adopted. And moved by Councillor Lee and second by Councillor Crawford. Any questions? And we call to vote. No. And that has carried. Okay. Moving into the public part of the meeting, I now call upon Director Romanowski to introduce item 4.1, PDS-2024-01, Community Benefits Charge Strategy and Bylaw. Oh, sorry. Mr. McCullough.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. As most of you know, my name is Sean McCullough. I'm the Supervisor of Planning Policy and Research here at the Town of Ajax. With me this afternoon, I also have Nancy Neal online, who's a manager with Watson and Associate Economist. She has been the consultant on this project and has really been helping us out. So today we are here to present the proposed Community Benefits Charge Strategy and Bylaw. As Nancy will present, this is a new tool that was developed by the provincial government that can be applied to new eligible high-density development to collect money to pay for growth-related capital infrastructure. This tool replaces the former Section 37 height and density bonusing section that was in the Planning Act, and Council may remember that this was a tool that allowed Council to pass bylaws to require community benefits in exchange for height and density bonusing. Council used the former tool twice, once for the Medallion project on the north side of Roslyn Road, as well as another second time at the southwest corner of Taunton and Ravenscroft. This new tool creates a more transparent process that would apply to all new eligible high-density development. Completion of this project was identified as one of the actions in Council's strategic plan. This tool will also help the town recover some of the cost following the impacts from Bills 108 and Bill 23, related to studies that can be no longer collected through development charges, as well as the significant loss to parkland dedication. Council has been urging the province to ensure that municipalities are made whole from this legislation. Now, this tool doesn't get us all the way there, but it certainly helps. With that brief introduction, I will turn it over to Nancy to provide her presentation and walk you through the great work that her team has completed. Thank you very much.
Hi, Nancy. If you hit the button in the middle of your screen, that will activate your microphone. And then if you would like to share your content, down the left-hand side, you should have a share screen option. Oh. All right, now you can select your screen or program. Fantastic. Oh, you'll have to hit your button again to activate your mic. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Good afternoon, members of committee. I am getting a bit of feedback. I can hear myself. Is that something I need to deal with on my side?
We can't hear it on our end, so I think it might be something on your side.
Okay. I'll just continue along then. I do have a brief presentation to take you through the legislative requirements of the Planning Act in regard to community benefit charges, as well as to go through the process we undertook with staff and present the recommended rate that is being put forth later this month for council's consideration with approval of the bylaw. So as Sean mentioned, Watson and Associates Economists Limited was retained by the town to undertake the strategy that's required through the Planning Act. The purpose of this presentation today is to meet the legislative public consultation requirement set out in the Planning Act related to the CBC strategy, to summarize the findings and recommendations set out in the strategy and draft bylaw, and address any questions from council and the public. The CBC strategy and draft bylaw were posted to the town's website on February 4th of last year. And there were two meetings undertaken on December 5th, one in the afternoon with the stakeholders, developing landowners basically, and a further one in the evening as a public open house for anyone who wanted to attend. As Sean mentioned, the CBC is a discretionary funding tool to recover capital costs related to high-density developments and redevelopments in the town. This section does replace the previous Section 37 Planning Act community benefits that you have imposed, as Sean mentioned, a couple of times. The CBC is for growth-related capital, and it is in addition to development charges and parkland dedication or cash in lieu of payment of parkland payment tools that also are available to the town. There are no service restrictions for what you can include in the community benefit charge, the way there is through development charges. However, we cannot fund the same capital costs within both bylaws. The development charges and parkland dedication provide for broader application on all types of developments, where the CBC only applies to high-density residential development types that meet special criteria. The COVID-19 Act, or Bill 197, that came into effect on September 18th, 2022, allowed municipalities to undertake a strategy and pass a community benefit charge strategy. The province also passed the More Homes Built Faster Act in 2022, commonly referred to as Bill 23, that added additional amendments that restrict the town's ability to collect revenues to fund the growth-related capital from certain types of developments. Those amendments include exempting affordable, attainable, inclusionary zoning, affordable residential units, and nonprofit housing units, in addition to the original statutory exemptions that were provided in Bill 197, which we'll talk about in a future slide. On December 4th of last year, the Affordable Homes and Good Jobs Act, Bill 134, received royal assent, and it amended the definition of affordable housing, which will apply to both the Development Charges Act and the Planning Act in regard to community benefit charges and parkland dedication. What it has done is introduced both a income-based test as well as an average market price or rent test that we are waiting on a bulletin from the ministry to provide us with how to measure what the average rent, average purchase price, and average incomes for the town are. At this point, therefore, those components are not in place, but upon proclamation and release of that bulletin, those types of units will be mandatorily exempt. Before passing a community benefit charge bylaw, the municipality must prepare a strategy that identifies the facilities, services, and matters that will be funded through the revenue generated, and it must comply with the prescribed regulations as defined in Ontario Regulation 509/20. You must also consult with such persons and public bodies as the municipality considers appropriate, and that is what we are doing formally today, and what we also were trying to undertake as part of the December 5th meetings. The CBC bylaw, as I mentioned, does not apply to all high-density development. It only applies to those that have a minimum of 5 stories and a minimum of 10 residential units. Those statutory exemptions that I mentioned earlier include long-term care homes, retirement homes, the not-for-profit, colleges and universities or post-secondary Indigenous institutes, and any housing built by the Royal Canadian Legions, as well as hospices. And then, of course, the new affordable, attainable, and inclusionary zoning units, if you have an inclusionary zoning bylaw. The CBC may be appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal within 40 days of bylaw adoption. And once imposed, the applicant may pay the CBC under protest if they feel that it exceeds the prescribed rate, which may not be higher than 4% of the property's land value on the day before a building permit is issued. A simplified methodology calculation that we take into consideration through the strategy, we do identify the amount, type, and location of all residential and non-residential growth, and then also identify the eligible component of that high-density residential growth. We looked at it over a 10-year forecast period, and then we reviewed the capital needs for growth that included non-development charge eligible services, the amount in excess of what you need for parkland that is in excess of what the Planning Act, parkland dedication or cash in lieu provisions provide, as well as possible DC eligible services that are not currently included in the development charge. We then identified an increase in need for services to specific services you provide, and a look at that as in relation to the eligible high density growth. We then identified specific capital projects that the staff felt were the priority to include in this strategy. We deducted where there was excess capacity already in the system. We looked at whether there was any grant subsidies or other contributions that would help to pay towards any of the capital projects and reduce that, as well as turned our mind to whether or not there was a benefit to the existing development, and then benefit to all of the non-eligible growth, both residential and non-residential. That gave us a net cost that we then looked at in relation to the estimated land values that we were anticipating throughout the municipality for these eligible high density developments, and made sure that the land value did not exceed the 4%. To give you some background, the total population is anticipated to increase to approximately 153,000 people by late 2033, which results in an increase of approximately 22,600 people over the next 10 years. Eligible high density growth anticipates 10,065 people in 5,820 residential units. So a significant amount of the growth is actually going to take place in these eligible units. And that's just what the first table here demonstrates.
Sorry to interrupt. I do apologize. One of our members has a point of order. I do have to recognize that. Please indulge.
Okay, sure.
Mayor Collier, are you there?
Yes, but you've turned it off. Is it on now?
Yes.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, but we allowed 10 minutes for a delegation. We're only on not even just past halfway through the slides. I'm going to have to ask that the presenter speed it up, please. I mean, we've all read the report.
Okay, not a problem.
I apologize. Is it 10 minutes for presentation? And what time are we at now?
We're about 15.
Sorry, according to the clerk, we're under 10 minutes. So if you could just wrap it up to the speaker, thank you.
Certainly can. Is the screen still being shared?
Yes, please proceed.
It's not advancing now. Let me just share it again. There we go. So of the anticipated growth, we've highlighted here how much of the residential growth is high density, and of that high density growth, which is approximately 50% of the total growth, 81% is eligible for the CBC. Services that were considered include parks and recreation services, including the parkland acquisition that was in excess of the Planning Act requirements, public art, growth-related studies, and the CBC strategies themselves. The growth-related needs identified for a potential of $6.7 million to be recovered through the community benefits. These costs represent approximately 7.6% of total land value that's forecasted for eligible high-density developments, based on an average land value of $7.1 million per hectare or $2.87 per acre. As this exceeds the 4% maximum, it is recommended that the 4% maximum is imposed through the bylaw. There's a highlighted table here that provides a little more detail as to the amount of the gross costs, deductions made, and the net costs that are related to growth, and those amounts that are actually being considered as benefiting the high density eligible units. With the maximum total of $4 million or 4% of 3.549 million, that would provide us with the 4%. Going forward, the city or the town will have to prioritize the projects on this list for funding. However, there is additional projects there that are needed for growth if there is additional land value that comes forward that can be funded.
Sorry to interrupt, but we are over the 10-minute time for presentation.
Sure.
I want to thank you
Yeah.
for your presentation and for your time.
Yeah.
Members of the committee, are there any questions? The chair recognizes Councillor Rob Tyler Moore. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Neal. So I'm just trying to simplify this maybe from my own filter here. So on page 6, we sort of reiterate that there's an exemption for affordable housing. So if somebody's building 100 units and 12 of them or 8 of them or whatever are affordable, you know, as per the province's definition of affordable housing. So that comes, and the developer or the builder says, oh, we get a break on that because we're providing, so we don't have to pay DC charges on it. So the town's always concerned about these things. But then would we then charge a 4% cost to the developer builder on the 92 residents that are left, thus not really, is my thinking, like they didn't really save anything by doing those units? Or could you sort of fly that in, how that would work, please?
Yeah. Through the chair, the development charges is a separate piece of legislation. Those affordable or attainable units will be exempt through that act for development charges. They will also be exempt through the Planning Act for community benefits. So if there was a number of affordable units, the proportionate share of the units in that overall building would be deducted, and a proportionate share of the total land value assigned to that. And therefore the 4% would not apply to the proportionate share of the land value for those units.
Okay,
in the development.
so.
They're exempt from both.
Okay, I get that, but if the developer, you know, if it costs $1 to build it, they've got to pay. So I'm just wondering, like, isn't that the same as not giving the developer a break on the DCs? Like, there sounds like they're paying anyways. Like, maybe Mr. McCullough, you could fly me in. And sorry if my questions are kind of remedial. I'm just trying to, in a very raw way.
Yeah, so
Because just, if I may, just before you answer, because my concern is I don't want to turn off the tap for affordable housing. I want to make sure that still happens. I don't want developers to say, well, with the CBC, now, you know, anyways.
Yeah, so through the chair to Councillor Tyler Moore, so the developer would not pay CBC for their affordable units.
But the CBC is being put in place to make up for the loss that the municipalities getting or being affected because we're giving them a break on the DCs, correct?
Partially. So through Bill 23, parkland dedication was significantly reduced. That's actually the biggest impact to the municipality, and this tool will collect only a fraction of that cost. So there would be some cost recovered from the parkland dedication, and then through our next DC background study, that we would have to redo this CBC bylaw, and there may be some studies that get transferred to this program. But again, even the programs that we're collecting, it's a fraction of the cost that we're losing from the legislative changes. Okay. The other piece to this is historically we've enacted Section 37 agreements. So to put that into perspective, through Nancy's work, it's projected over the next 10 years that we may collect $3.5 million in CBC revenue. From the Medallion project alone, that was approximately $2.99 million in Section 37 benefits that were paid to the town through that development.
Okay, one more question. Is the CBC a tool for the municipality, or is it mandated, like we have to do this for each developer or each development?
Yeah, so through the chair, Councillor Tyler Moore, it is a discretionary tool that we can use. We are not required to, though.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next, we have Mayor Collier. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. Pull up my questions, and Councillor Tyler Moore has answered some of them or asked some of them. I see this as potentially a disincentive for development, and I'm wondering. I don't want to take a step backwards. I understand we need to fill the gap with some costs that we have lost. So I'm wondering, can this potentially be used? I know we have cash in lieu of parkland. We allow cash in lieu of parking in some cases. Could this not be something like a cash in lieu of affordable units, where instead of just taking the money, because I assume this can be used for anything, probably things that are not related at all to primarily the MTSA, versus could that not be used to allow more affordable units as a requirement instead through a credit? Has that been looked at?
Sean, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I can start, then maybe if you have anything to add. So through the chair to Councillor Collier, so there already is really an incentive being added to this through the legislation. So affordable units, by virtue of them being exempt from paying this tool, they would not be required to pay it, and that in effect is a credit. I think in terms of if there was options to look to use this tool to pay for affordable housing units, we looked at that, but the challenge with that approach is we need capital projects where we ourselves would be constructing affordable housing units, and unfortunately we don't have any of those projects that we could have used this tool to pay for affordable housing units.
Well, what I mean is we make it a requirement. So let's just go to one other thing for a second. You talked about, so this is 4% of the land value. So how do you prorate that for the affordable units? If this property, let's talk about 190 Westney, because that's the only one in the MTSA so far. There's about 60 or 70 affordable units out of that 1,200, whatever it is, 5%. So how do you work that out on land value and this 4%?
Through the chair, I can take that. The Mayor, the amount of units and the value of the land would be apportioned to all of the units. We'd be proportionately splitting it out on the number of units. And if there was 10% were affordable, then 10% of the land value would be reduced and not impose the 4% charge on.
Okay. So let's change this around a little bit more again, because what's the best way to word this? Most of these properties are in the MTSA. That's where the bulk of this is going to come from. And there is going to be some affordability. Two of the exempt classes that I saw were whether it is a nonprofit or whether it is in somewhere where inclusionary zoning. And I believe anything in the MTSA would check both those boxes and be exempt from this, if I read it correctly. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, further through the chair, on the inclusionary zoning units, they have to be affordable units within those inclusionary zoning areas, not all units. And as for the nonprofit housing, yes, they are, regardless of where they are, exempt from the charge.
So, okay, but only those quote affordable units, not the if the project contains affordable units, but not 100%, it's not exempt.
Correct.
Okay.
Only the units, only the proportionate share of the units that are affordable are exempt.
Okay. I guess when you looked at this study, because I know what our official plan and has for the MTSA currently, but I believe the density in that MTSA is going to be probably about double, because instead of basing it on 25, 30 stories, we've sort of set the benchmark at 60 stories now. So having double the units, would that not affect this 4%? Would the 4% charged on double the units or double the development not double the return? Shouldn't this be 2%
Through the
based
chair,
on
no.
what we know is going to be there?
Yeah, through the chair, the number of units that are actually on the site may or may not change the land value the day before building permit issuance. If it does, then you'd still be applying the 4%, less
But
any non or affordable.
right, but I would think, you know, if you have a land with a 30-story,
Oh, did he cut out?
It appears that Mayor Collier has disconnected from the meeting.
That's okay, because we were around the 5-minute mark for that anyways. So we'll move on to Councillor Lisa Bauer. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Neal, for the presentation, and Mr. McCullough. So one of the slides made reference to high density, the definition being more than, I think, a minimum of 5 stories and 10 residential units. So I'm just curious to that because that sounds a lot different than when we look at our town zoning requirements for medium and high densities. Can you speak to that, please?
Yes, through the chair, that's the minimum requirements. So if there was a low-rise 4-story apartment building, it would not apply, even if there was more than 10 residential units in it. So there must be a minimum of 5 stories and a minimum of 10 residential units for the charge to apply.
Okay, so then for some of these developments that would meet the 5-story, 10 residential, we're not defining them, and please correct me if I'm wrong, maybe Mr. McCullough, we're not defining those as high density areas, but they would qualify for this CBC tool?
So through the chair to Councillor Bauer, so the work that Watson's completed, they've looked at our growth projections. And so of the approximately 7,000 units that are high density that we're projecting, about 5,000 would be eligible because there's an understanding that a number of units would be accessory apartments or other types of apartment buildings that are lower than 4 stories. So those units would not be eligible for collection under the CBC, and we would just be collecting for apartments that are in the categories that Ms. Neal identified.
Okay. So, okay, I didn't realize that 5 stories was considered high density.
And if I can clarify, that's just the criteria that the province had established. So that's what the province is deemed to be appropriate for this tool.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And then my other question, which you know, there's this CBC strategy coming forward, which talks about number of units. We have a housing pledge that we signed in Ajax. We have a housing strategy in Ajax. Are all of these related to one another or somehow aligned, or or are they completely separate entities?
So through the chair to Councillor Bauer, so they are all separate entities. So this is really just looking at the finance side and looking at how we as a town can pay for the infrastructure that is needed to accommodate this growth. And this is just an additional tool that we can use in addition to.
Councillor Bauer, are you still there?
It appears that we've lost some of our remote participants.
Okay, so we'll, she's still got some time left. We'll wait for her to get back on in a minute and we'll move on to Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question through you to Sean is, how many other municipalities have created bylaws like this?
So through the chair to Councillor Crawford, so that's a good question. I wouldn't know the exact number, but we have been seeing all the large municipalities have been applying them. The city of Pickering recently applied one last year, but we also have Toronto, Mississauga, Markham, Vaughan, all those municipalities. And actually, Nancy may have a better understanding because they've been working for other municipalities on a similar project as well.
So of the Durham Lakeshore side, is just Pickering at this point?
To my knowledge, Pickering at this point, and I know the others have been looking at it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Oshawa, sorry, through the chair, Oshawa also has one.
Okay, so I will now open the public meeting portion of tonight's meeting. Oh, sorry, I apologize. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. If I just may jump in, this revenue tool has been brought in as a result of the changes to the Development Charges Act, and it's not available to all municipalities. It's only available to those that would have that with other area municipalities that do have these larger facilities coming in, that they are implementing or bringing these this revenue tool forward as well.
Excellent. That's some good information to have. Thank you for that, Ms. Valentine. I have no questions because my questions have been answered. Are there any other questions of members of council? Seeing none. Okay, so I now open up the public portion of tonight's meeting and invite any member of the public who is present and interested in speaking to the matter to come forth at the accessibility podium, sign in at the sign-in sheet. Any members? Okay, Mr. Clerk, do we have anyone online?
Just checking here, Madam Chair. It appears that we do not at this time.
Okay, and did we get Mayor Collier back in? Is there anything else
It appears that he is not connected at this time.
Okay. And what about Councillor Bauer?
Councillor Bauer is connected.
And did she have, oh, there she comes. Here we go. Councillor Bauer, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Those are my questions, but out of curiosity, I know that in the presentation it said that Section 37 was used twice in our town. Would that be considered a high use, a low use, or has it just not been something that we found useful to use prior to today?
If I can answer that question through the chair to Councillor Bauer. I think it hasn't been widely used in Ajax because we are just now starting to see the type of development that would trigger what Section 37 gave us the ability to do. So I think if we had still Section 37 as a tool, we would be using it far more frequently, sort of in our current development environment and going forward.
Okay, thank you very much. And if this passes, do you foresee that higher use of this strategy?
And if I may add on to that, as I mentioned earlier, through this tool, we're still seeing that we would collect significantly less than we would have otherwise had we continued to use that Section 37 tool. So as I mentioned earlier, the Medallion was a good example where we just collected just shy of 3 million using that tool alone. And the work that Nancy's team has done, we expect to collect approximately 3.5 million over the next 10 years over all the development.
Right. Okay. Okay, thank you. Those were my questions, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bauer. I do have one question. When was this, could you refresh my memory when this report was done? When it was finished? Presented to the team? When was it completed? Do we know?
To you, Madam Chair, if you can clarify in terms of the CBC report.
Yes.
So we completed the CBC report at the start of December, and we presented that during public consultation meetings in early December. And then this is the first time we're bringing it forward to this committee.
And can I ask why it's the first time it's coming forward? It's just the timing, correct?
That's correct. We worked closely with Watson as well to examine our development charge background study following the legislative changes, and we needed to enable that process to play out before we could finalize the work on the CBC.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for your time. And we have no one clerk online? No? Okay, so the public meeting proportion of tonight's meeting is closed. We're going to take a vote, correct? And before we take a vote, we are voting on PDS 2024-01, Community Benefits Charge, moved by Councillor Crawford and seconded by, who is this? Councillor Dyes, that the report entitled Community Benefit Charge CBC Strategy and Bylaw and attachments be received for information. 2, that council approve the CBC strategy included as ATT-1, including the capital project listing set out in Chapter 4 of the strategy dated December 1st, 2023, subject to annual review and approval during the capital budget process. And 3, that the draft Committee Benefits Charge Bylaw included as ATT-2 be endorsed and forwarded to the future council meeting for approval. So can we get a vote on that? Yes?
Just so I'm clear, are we referring to this is just for information? Or are we actually, if this passes now, maybe Mr. McCullough, through you, Madam Chair? What exactly happens?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. So this would be council approving the projects that were identified in the actual CBC strategy. And just to clarify though, this would just be to fund those projects. And as they came forward through future capital budget projects, there would be additional approval by council. But this is approving the projects within the CBC strategy itself, as well as endorsing the implementing bylaw, which would be forwarded to the next council meeting for approval.
Thank you.
Councillor Crawford, you have a question? Go ahead.
More of a comment, if I'm allowed. The government has been talking about making us whole for a number of months, if not years. Is this one way of them making us whole?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Crawford, or Regional Councillor Crawford, we don't know if it's intentional that this is the approach that they're taking. This is just a tool that they had concerns with the former Section 37, so they've implemented this process. But indirectly, this will help provide some funding. But as I mentioned earlier, it really is a fraction of what our losses are.
Have we had any indication around us being made whole at all?
Nothing to
I mean,
our
I know
knowledge.
at AMO, we're constantly asking the question, even as up to last month with the new Minister of Housing, but yeah, no guarantee. Okay, thank you.
All right, I call to vote. Let's vote. And that passes. Okay. So there are no other presentations, and we're going to call for an adjournment, correct? There we go. That is moved by Rob Tyler Morin, second by Councillor Crawford. Sorry, Councillor Rob Tyler Morin, Councillor Crawford, and call for a vote for the adjournment.
Good job, Chair.
Thank you all. And that's a close.